Our opening thought comes from Neil Gaiman from his work, American Gods. Religions are, by definition, metaphors. After all, God is a dream, a hope, a woman, an ironist, a father, a city, a house of many rooms, a watchmaker who left his prize chronometer in the desert, someone who loves you, even perhaps against all evidence, a celestial being whose only interest is to make sure your football team, army, business, or marriage thrives, prospers, and triumphs over all opposition. Religions are places to stand and look and act, vantage points from which to view the world. Our next reading is from Joseph Campbell, from The Power of the Myth. Mythology is not a lie. Mythology is poetry. It is metaphorical. It has been well said that mythology is the penultimate truth. Penultimate because the ultimate cannot be put into words. It is beyond words, beyond images, beyond that bounding rim of the Buddhist wheel of becoming. Mythology pitches the mind beyond that rim to what can be known but not told. Our next reading comes from Rollo May, from his work, The Cry for Myth. Myths are like the beams in a house, not exposed to outside view. They are the structure which holds the house together so people can live in it. There can be no stronger proof of the impoverishment of our contemporary culture than the popular, though profoundly mistaken, definition of myth as falsehood. At 8 a.m. on a Monday morning in late August of 1984, I did what every fundamentalist Christian minister wishes their young parishioners would never do. No, I didn't get drunk or do drugs or get into a fight or break the law or anything like that. All those things could be good for a testimony down the road. No, I did something else that was much more problematic for most fundamentalist Christian ministers, and that was, as a first-year student in college, I walked into my first class of my first semester at Oklahoma City University, and that class was titled Introduction to Biblical Literature, taught by Reverend Dr. Robert Jones, not to be confused with the racist fundamentalist Bob Jones, who founded Bob Jones University. No, Reverend Dr. Robert Jones was the anti-Bob Jones. He was a compassionate, open-minded person. He was a true scholar and someone who cared deeply about his students and about cultivating their capacity to think for themselves about the Bible, about scriptures. Hence the fear of the Christian fundamentalist minister. And on 8 a.m. on that Monday morning, on my first day of college, when I was just 17, not quite 18 years old, Dr. Jones walked up to the lecture podium and said something that blew my 17-year-old fundamentalist mind away. Dr. Jones used the word myth to describe many of the stories of the Bible. I didn't walk out of class. I stayed in the class and listened to him. Dr. Jones was not trying to blow my mind, but he was trying to open it. He was trying to open our minds to the truth and power of religious mythology when it is not mistakenly interpreted in a literal way. I have to say I was not completely surprised that Dr. Jones would say such a thing about the Bible. My fundamentalist mentors in high school had encouraged me to attend Oral Roberts University rather than Oklahoma City University, and they had warned me about all the heresies I would encounter in the School of Religion at Oklahoma City University. And they encouraged me to hold fast, to hold the faith, to keep the faith, and hold fast to their literal interpretations of the Bible and to the infallibility of the Scriptures. But it didn't take long for me to recognize that a literal interpretation of the Bible and a belief in the Bible's infallibility actually diminished the truth that can be found within its pages. I came to learn that the Scriptures of the world's religions contain great wisdom for humanity, but they are products of their context. And when we attempt to take them literally and apply them without critical interpretation, they can be used in unhealthy, dangerous, and even deadly ways. Very few things are more dangerous than mistaking our myths about the ultimate as being the ultimate themselves. It's natural for humans to tell stories, to make sense of the world, and to cultivate meaning in our lives, but it is dangerous when we attempt to make everyone else be a character in our stories instead of allowing them to create their own. The problem with most forms of religious fundamentalism is not that they take some of their religious scriptures literally. It is that they take literally the scriptures that they ought to take metaphorically, and take metaphorically the scriptures that ought to be taken literally. There's nothing wrong about taking literally the admonitions to love others, do justice, practice mercy, and care for the vulnerable. But when we attempt to view religious mythology as scientific and historical truth, it can very quickly take us into dangerous territory. The Bible is not a history book. It is religious mythology that expresses the religious experiences of many communities in particular times and in particular places. At times, the Bible engages and reflects upon historical events, but it is not helpful to read it as a literal account of history. And while the authors of the Bible often ponder and write poetically about the wonders of the cosmos as they experienced it, the Bible should never be mistaken as a science book or an authority on scientific matters. The Bible and other forms of religious mythology should also not be taken as a prediction or a foretelling of future events. The future is open and not determined by the authors of religious mythology. The dangers of seeing religious mythology as history, science, and a predictor of the future can be seen clearly here in our culture, here in the United States, where we know that according to a 2010 Pew Research poll, 41% of us, 41% of all people living in the United States, not just 41% of Christians, but 41% of all persons living in the United States in 2010 believed that Jesus Christ would return before the year 2050. 23% believe this will definitely happen before 2050. 18% thought that it would probably happen. Check out the Pew Research poll from 2010 if you want to see the breakdown more clearly. Another significant number of persons, 42% to be precise, in a 2014 Gallup poll here in the United States, said that they believe that God created humans in their present form 10,000 years ago. That's 42% of all persons living in the United States that believe that, not just 42% of Christians. 42% of all persons living in the United States in 2014 believe that God created us in our present form about 10,000 years ago. And that statistic has held steady for nearly 3 decades, 42%. 41% and 42%. Very important numbers in terms of understanding the culture of where we live and the politics of where we live. Views on climate change, international affairs, especially our relationship to Israel, science in general, women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, and long-term sustainability are all influenced by where one stands in relation to the questions about the return of Christ and evolutionary theory. Why be concerned about climate change and sustainability if one truly believes that Christ is going to return in 2050? Why have any coherent international agenda other than supporting Israel if one truly believes Christ will return by 2050? Why develop any policies for long-term sustainability if one truly believes that Christ will return by 2050? Why would persons listen to climate scientists and environmental scientists when they already have a bias against science that is telling them their views about creation are wrong? Why work for women's rights and LGBTQ rights when the worldview that makes you believe that Christ will return by 2050 and also that humans have only existed for 10,000 years also tells you that women should submit and LGBTQ persons are sinners? If one believes that the earth as we know it will end by 2050 and that we have only been here on this planet for about 10,000 years in our present form, this has a profound effect on one's worldview and political outlook. Those are just some examples of the dangers of taking religious mythology literally and how deadly that outlook can become. One of the most important things that we as humanity can do to ensure the creation of a sane, just, peaceful, and sustainable future is to give up any attachment to religious mythology as literal truth. Not to give up religious mythology, but to give up our attachment to religious mythology as literal truth and begin to see the deeper truths and the deeper meaning to which religious mythology is pointing. Religious myths are not inherently false. They are not inherently false. They have truth within them, but they become false, and they become dangerous, and they become deadly when we take them literally. May we not diminish their power, truth, and meaning by doing so. Our parting thought comes from Madeleine L'Anglais, who writes, "When we lose our myths, we lose our place in the universe."